I think a good place to start, maybe, Ralph, is what should we take from Triton? What is important about it? What should the community think about it?
Oh, I think we could talk an hour about that. So first, one of the most significant positive things is the fact that Schneider actually went public here on stage at S4. And especially, yes, yes. And I think especially the young folks among you, they have no idea what this means, because when you think back 2010 when Stuxnet made the news, the first conference where Stuxnet was discussed was WiseCon 2010. And just in case you didn't know, Siemens presented at that conference, and everybody was expecting that they would talk about Stuxnet. Instead, so they did not. Instead, they gave kind of like a sales pitch on their latest DCS product for the electric sector. And then later, when I said, no, this is a targeted attack against the Iranian nuclear program, and the media hit on Siemens, well, can you tell us about that? What about Iran? And Siemens' reaction was always like, Iran? Where is Iran? You know, that country there in the Middle East. We don't do any business with Iran. And the full disclosure was that Siemens used to do business in Iran for more than 100 years, but they had just a couple of weeks before Stuxnet made the news discontinued this business due to the trade sanctions because of the nuclear program. So just to give you some context and what that means for the industry at large. I think this is a very big progress. And by the way, I just didn't want to break Siemens' balls. I think it is worthwhile pointing out that the better strategy is to come forward and look what the reaction is from the community. They get applauded. Maybe Siemens at the time was thinking, oh no, they will rip us apart. No, because I mean we are adults. We have already learned that these products are vulnerable, but we want to fix the problems. We want to know about the problems and fix the problems. So that is a major improvement. And so let's not get too positive about Schneider. The one thing, I have one problem with their assessment, a little problem. So when you tell me the attackers had unlimited skills and unlimited time, I would disagree with that, because obviously OPSEC was none of their skills. So the one thing that I have a hard time understanding is if you try to attack a safety system, and just to give you some context here, because I realized that on Twitter this was not correctly understood, a safety system's purpose is to prevent health hazards, okay? Whereas a protection system is, the purpose of a protection system is to prevent equipment damage. So if you are attacking a safety system, the purpose is to kill people or to accept health injuries. And if that's what you intend to do, and then I see you experimenting on target, I mean, what are you thinking? So in my assessment, these guys really don't have their act together. If you want to hit hard, then you better get your act together in your lab. Obviously, they do have a lab. And so I would rate them like as a D+ in that respect.
And remember, whoever did that, I didn't say that. Right, so if you're going to go hack anybody here at this panel, it will not be me. Right?
So I think the unlimited resources and skills, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. There are other things that I find very important for the big picture, for the framing, especially the ones that are left out. So there are two important pieces of information that are left out, as you have heard. There is no dropper. We don't see any logic for communication with some kind of C2 architecture, for example. So that leaves the question open, how did the attacker get on that legitimate engineering station? By the way, legitimate engineering station, don't we know that? There was the other attack called Stuxnet, and I used to make a big point of, engineering stations are like your crown jewels. They must be the best protected systems in your whole plant, and certainly especially for a safety system.
So I know from what I've heard that there's lots that we still don't know, and it may well be something to talk about next year, because I think there's going to be a lot done, a lot written about Triton, Trisys, Hatman in the coming years, and we'll know more about perspective. And so, how was that engineering workstation protected? How did they get on there? What were the purposes? We will find a lot of that out. But I think that, we all have been talking about the difficulty of securing legacy infrastructures, and for a 16-year-old piece of gear, it was almost relatively new if we look at the bell curve of system life cycles. And so, so I know that, Invensys, Schneider have been, here in this community for a long time. They lean forward with security, and that's one reason why they were here, presenting as part of the team. But even, they have, problems going back into that legacy infrastructure, their legacy deployments. And so that's something that we all have to look at. I know Anqui from Red Balloon talked about some different ways of bringing those levels of protection out farther. And I've always been, as you guys know, as concerned about future architectures as I am about the protection of legacy infrastructures. And so this brings to mind some of those things. But also I think that this is just one of a series of impactful events in the last several years, whether it's attacks in Ukraine over a couple of years, the Nuclear 13 or palmetto fusion, and now attacks on safety systems that we're not all voices crying in the wilderness to our C-suites who used to say, well, how do we protect these things? There have been no attacks. Why would anyone attack X? And now we're getting both more government scrutiny or expectations on us all to start, but also more need for resources, and people are kind of backing us up more now. So we have to step to the plate again and start coming up with these new areas. But once again, so I'm obviously a big fan of S4. I think the community that has been developed over the 11 years here, people know who to call. We were up here on stage with 3 different companies, all who had a part, who also referenced other folks who had parts. It points to a broader community than we had before. It may point to a lack of central leadership in response in some areas, but that's something that we still can work out.
So I think nobody would nail Schneider against the wall because that 16-year-old control system was not cyber secure. I think that what you would just expect, and just given the breadth of the products that you see in such a large company, then certainly you cannot secure everything at once, and it might well take 20 years. So, and this gets me back to my point. There are some questions I would have in respect to the asset owner. So how was the infiltration done? Unfortunately, we still don't know that yet, but I think Blake Johnson hinted on Twitter that they might disclose details about that in the near future. That would be very interesting. Could turn out, I'm just speculating here, that it was an inside job. So I'm just putting it out here as a wild speculation. Could it be some latter-day Marucci-Shire thing?
Oh, you said Marucci-Shire.
I did.
We've had an 8-year-old rule here.
The youngsters don't know that either. Could that be a latter-day Vitek Boden? I don't know. But here is my point. This is not so difficult to figure out. So hopefully we'll find out soon, and this will shed a completely different light on what the attack means. And we haven't figured that out, and therefore I think it's a bit too early to cry wolf and let all the dogs in the media loose, 0-day, nation state, blah, blah, blah. I think we don't know yet. The other missing piece is the missing cyber-physical payload. That is something that also I find a little bit puzzling, because it wouldn't be a big mystery. You don't need to infiltrate any, let's just say, Iranian, North Korean networks in order to find that payload. You just need to go to that safety controller and follow the wire. Then you would know what the payload could be designed to do. So maybe for the IT folks in this audience, a safety controller always has a very limited purpose, unlike a basic production controller. So a safety controller is manipulating a very few set of actuators. And you would be able to understand any potential attack against such a safety controller by just looking at the physical side of that cyber-physical system. So see which part of the process is safeguarded by that controller, see the actuators that are attached to that controller, and then you had a pretty good idea what the payload could be designed to do. Because a general purpose, generic attack against a safety controller does not make any sense. Because they are so specialized, etc. The only general purpose attack against the safety controller would be denial of service. That would be the low-hanging fruit.
But I want to warn you right now, because I remember back in this thing called Stuxnet, right? You may have heard of it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. That there were, and I have a point to make here at some point. There were a lot of people who came out early, with some conjecture, with some incomplete analysis, with some other things, and it so happened that that someone named Ralph Langner came out with what ended up being the kind of definitive, picture of Stuxnet for the industry, and 60 Minutes and other things followed. And I was telling someone, today, I wonder who will emerge as, the person next year who, when the dust settles, had the best look initially, and then was turned to, as the one who was right. And will be the face of this particular vulnerability. And once again, we don't even know if there was or was not impact for certain, right? So Stuxnet, we eventually determined, it wasn't just this random, piece of something, and then we found out what it was doing. Like I said, I'm not ready to say what it may or may not have been doing, but there might be a new Ralph Langner, so watch out. Someone's going to be coming down to take that chair, not this chair.
Maybe I should do it again.
Well, now you see why I like these guys on the closing panel, because by day 3 I'm kind of tired and I can just throw out a sentence, and 20 minutes later I have to say something again.
Just shut up, Dave. Shut up, Dave.
Exactly.
So let's follow that thread. Yeah. So my point is, and this actually relates to the Stuxnet analysis. Once that you have the physical side of that attack, everything gets clear. Okay, and that is, if you reread To Kill a Centrifuge, the major breakthroughs came when we had video footage from Natanz, and I think the same thing would happen here. I don't expect it to happen, but I'm just saying, if the companies in question, or if the asset owner would share details of the attacked installation, it would be pretty clear. Okay, let's just move on a little bit. The other thing why I have difficulties putting or hanging this attack very high, I say it is significant, so it's a game changer, I would say that. Also, you remember my talk from Tuesday. I don't think it's going to change the landscape in the sense of a wake-up call, etc., so people will fall back asleep again. That won't happen, but it's a game changer because of that safety system. But I wouldn't hang it too high, since we also should put into perspective the effort that would have been required to block this attack or to mitigate this vulnerability. How about a simple whitelisting solution on the engineering station? How about that? How about even some basic stuff like file integrity monitoring software? Would have blocked the attack, right? So I think this is something that we need to consider when we assess the advancedness of any attack. That is the level that would have been required, the effort that would have been required to make this attack impossible. And again, so maybe it's a little bit too early to speculate about nation state. I wouldn't rule out state-sponsored. It wouldn't surprise me if at the end of the day we see another Iranian hacker group like the Flaming Sword of Justice or whatever.
I don't know. These hacking for booze guys are pretty good.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
they could have just sat down on a weekend and said, what can we do?
Maybe just
so ask a question, Dale.
Okay.
You need to go.
Well, and I just wanted to say one thing about Triton is as I hear you guys talking about this and I hear 16-year-old controllers, what I keep waiting for and I just never hear is someone saying, and maybe we should be looking at replacing 16-year controllers in critical systems. I know you guys are not against that, but
Right, yeah, so.
but you know, we should be actually putting that in front of our executives as something to at least consider as an option. But let's go to the next question. Zach, I generally at S4, I don't like acronym soup. I don't like to talk about this organization, that. You don't see a lot of those presentations here. But I think people would be interested in ICS CERT because that has been kind of the flagship organization in this space. And, you know, now it's NCC ICS CERT, and maybe ICS CERT will go away at all.
Right.
And what do you see as the impact of that to the community of that change?
And as you know, I try to be careful and respectful of my program sponsors at different times. But when I was, actually, I guess I wasn't asked about this, but my advice was that you have a very successful brand in both the US CERT and the ICS CERT. It took a long time to get people to know and understand how to get into the government to report these things. It took a long time to get people to trust you know, the process as much as they do now. And so I was very disappointed to lose the brand. Now at the same time, we also know that DHS has moved a lot of the ICS CERT watch floor, or whatever that function is, out of Idaho Falls. I wasn't necessarily very disappointed about that. You know, some of you who hear my presentations say, you know, national labs should do things that others can't, won't, or shouldn't do. And I think that functionality is something that's well understood in industry now, and it really wasn't, you know, national lab work. We're still working on malicious software analysis. We're working on response teams. We're doing a lot of things that are still, you know, the really important stuff that labs can help out with. And so I think that as I talk with people at the NKIC and others, that to remind them that they really have a tremendous outreach job to do to make sure that they can quell the confusion you know, within the communities, because DHS has done a great job of stepping up to the plate, whether it was medical device vulnerability, as happened at S4, right?
Yeah.
Hey, who did we report this to? And Marty Edwards raises his hand. Well, I guess it's, you know, it's DHS, you know, transportation and others. And so the capabilities are still there. You know, the function of an ICS CERT or US CERT watch floor didn't go away. It's just how we do those entry points, and I think we'll all be learning over that. And maybe it's incumbent upon us to, you know, make sure that we, you know, work with DHS to make sure they let not us know, because, you know, we'll be paying attention. But the other people, you know, that may have a vulnerability report in 6 months and didn't get the memo that it had changed. And so, you know, they have a big job to do. But I think the current, you know, government managers there realize that they, you know, have an important role, and they do feel that they are making this change for good reasons, right? And so we'll be able to, you know, give them the benefit of the doubt. We're working with them, and so go from there. But you know, I think it's disruptive. And like I said, I would have recommended it. I did recommend against it, but, you know, we're going to go and we'll work with it.
Can we blame that on Trump?
No. Nope, actually we can't.
Okay, well now the question that I always like to ask here, but sometimes dread the answer. Ralph, I'll start with you. What are we not talking about at S4 that we should be talking about? Yeah. What wasn't on stage? What haven't you heard people in conversations talking about? What should we be focusing on we're missing?
Yeah, well, this is going to disappoint you. I think, and I think also many of you will not agree with that, what we're not talking about and should be talking about is SCADAsec 101. And I'll tell you why. How many times have you heard about that problem of making the community bigger, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So if I believe everybody agrees in this audience that this is the top quality ICS security conference. But why should we limit that top quality to those most advanced technical topics and details? Why not just try to establish some same level of quality talks for the beginners, for the rookies? So here is how I see it. We are still way behind the power curve. I think Dale did succeed to a great extent in raising this conference from 45 people in 2007 when we were freezing our asses off in the Coven Center in a dark room, cramped in a dark room. It was horrible. It was really horrible. And then, that was in Sunny Isles, I guess, and there was only one shitty restaurant that everybody was then hanging out in the evening. Wasn't that terrible? I mean,
but he kept coming back.
I enjoyed it.
I mean, he just
so, and now 11 years later, we are one order of magnitude
we're in the big
bigger.
time
Okay.
now,
11 years, that's not fast enough. So I think many of you would agree that it would be worthwhile going for something like RSA for OT, right? RSA conference has 45,000 attendees. I mean, are they any better than us? Are they more important?
Okay, but I want to say, so someone, asked me a while ago, if I'm a cyber expert or something, which I don't think I am, but I said, so expertise involves two things in this area. One is having a lot of experience in good and bad projects, especially the bad, and seeing things go. And the other thing I say is that you have some other people who are experts who disagree with you. So you're obviously an expert because I disagree.
Good.
Right.
Good.
And so
I think that's
because
great.
I think that this is, there are other places to get SCADA 101. The ICSJWG, the U.S. government. There's lots of other places, right?
Coming.
But the place, once again, this is a community, and we definitely invite people who may not.
We
be
need to grow the community. So if I had the liberty to pick the motto for S4x18, it would be grow. We need to grow this community, and we need to grow it fast. And I think the best way to make that happen is to have the rookies together with top-notch experts. Give the rookies the chance to also listen to the latest and greatest technical talks, policy talks, etc., so that they can go back and forth, etc. We have to grow this community rather quick, because if we just take another 11 years to take it from 450 to 4,500, which would be one order of magnitude bigger, it won't be good enough. We are losing traction here, because why? I mean, still it's a great success, but the world is changing faster than we are growing to cope with all these new challenges. For me, the best part in the discussions here on stage was when Tyler Williams made that point, what a large corporation in oil and gas, what they're thinking about today. And that's like the fully digitized, cloud-based infrastructure. And I predict this is coming. This is coming faster than you would know. And the only way that we can deal with that is that we grow our base in order to cope with all that effort. And that won't happen if we continue the same pace as we did over the last 11 years. I mean, as nice as this progress was, but we need to grow faster.
Well, that's interesting, because, and I appreciate the feedback. I mean, I really do. I love to get challenging questions, and that's why I enjoy talking with you so much. But when we had, you remember originally S4, it was just gory technical.
Yeah.
I mean, it was stage 2, that's it. Bits and bytes, logic, and that sort of thing. And we said, well, let's bring the policy people in, and maybe the C-levels, the plant managers, and have some things for them on the main stage. And then the beauty of it was at the social events, they could talk to each other and build that. And I guess there is a theory that you could have some 101 stuff, and maybe those people could come into some of these other stages. They might not get it, but at least at the social events, then the beginners could mix with the experts and the policy. And that's interesting. We'll think about that.
Good.
That's a good idea.
Sometimes he listens to me, but usually that takes a couple of years.
Yeah, it does, yes. And I could probably give you 15 examples where it takes me like 2 or 3 years on a good time, right?
He's being a gracious host. He's just placating you.
No, but I'd like to ask you, Zach. So same question. What are we not talking about here that we should be?
Well, technically, and I've loved the talks and always do. One of the interesting stories of the past year, I think, has been about kind of the nature of resilience, right? And so, our cyber parts are parts of resilience, but we've seen the impact of brittle infrastructures and resilient infrastructures here in the past hurricane season, where 10, 11 years ago, Hurricane Wilma kind of decimated Florida. Substations were out all over the place. Power outages were long. this year because of the new substation infrastructure, buried, lines, et cetera. Not a single substation went down during the other two hurricanes here, as opposed to the brittle infrastructure in Puerto Rico, where we're seeing once again the effects of lack of resilience, but also
They're cyber resilient, right? Because they're using all the analog old stuff.
Yeah, they're cyber resilient. So poor governance. There are a lot of things there, but it also comes back to kind of the nature of government response, which is interesting right now. This is something that is really taking a lot of the efforts of the Department of Energy right now. And if you travel across the country, when people are very proud of their local teams that are going out to restore power in Puerto Rico, once again the industry is pulling together. But so cyber resilience, all hazards resilience is something that doesn't always hit here. We talk about it sometimes because it's not as cyber as other, but we have to remember that we are a key component of that. And as they rebuild some of these infrastructures, we have to make sure we're part of the conversation.
But wouldn't you almost put that in the consequence reduction
Absolutely.
phase because or bucket? And so I think actually when you told me that would have been a great talk, that comparison, Wilma and Irma. But what else can you talk about besides that it's a good idea? Are there, you think there's techniques and approaches that...
Absolutely. And Ralph and I have talked about this before, and for some reason we differ a little bit as well. So at Idaho and in other places, we're kind of coalescing on the fact that we realize that you do a risk management, risk assessment today, and then a whole new set or class of vulnerabilities comes out. The threat changes. I say that our new, more aggressive foreign policy may lead to having more dedicated attacks by certain threat actors. Ralph says that the U.S. doesn't need anyone to hate them anymore for attacks, so that you can say that later. But we're kind of talking about a consequence or impact focused approach to a lot of these things, so that way, no matter what happens in your environment, whatever new vulnerability, changes in threat, if there are several key consequences that will, economically damage your operation, then if we can engineer around those consequences, the Risch-King bill, some of you policy guys know out there, people lambasted it as being anti-technology, a Luddite, Back to the Future, where we also feel that if you can engineer discrete disruption zones, non-programmable areas where you can disrupt some of these consequences, then some of the entire classes of vulnerabilities will be taken off the page. And I think that we'll see a lot of that from both our lab and other actors out here in the industry.
Haven't you INL guys just developed a methodology to address that?
We have, well, thank you very much. We have. It's called Consequence-Driven
$10
Cyber-Informed Engineering.
And I think you even created a brochure, right?
Yes, we have a brochure.
Oh,
it's
is that
online.
true?
Yeah, gee, wow. So thank you so much. But no, we're and Andy Bachman is writing a book, so hopefully we'll be able to share that methodology. But we have some plans or some ideas on how to scale this, because we've done a very successful pilot with a East Coast utility, who will, I think, go more on the record, later on. And we're on our second pilot, but we need to be able to scale it. And as Ralph would say, we need to automate more parts of it, right? So
and I'll have the software to make that.
Well, that's good. So I appreciate that too. And tell me about those talks before you come on the stage, so we can get them on the agenda, because that would have been a great S4 talk. Those are, and we do encourage you to submit any talks that you think would be better for the event next year.
Yeah. So and in that case, I had asked about that, and our IP folks were like, they weren't at the stage yet where we would be able to talk about it. But next year we'll definitely be able to. We'll have a couple of pilots under our belt. We'll have a few other things, and we'll be starting to reach out to partners about sharing the methodology.
And you guys were on stage twice this year, so we appreciate you coming back.
And I count as one too. I know, so
yes, three. Okay, so as the clock is winding down, I just maybe a minute each on this, because one of the things that I'm terrified about is that we know things are moving faster. We know this huge change is coming. You gave Tyler's example. So I guess intellectually, I would say this audience accepts it, but I don't see the action that supports that knowledge. And even some of the solutions I see that have been talked about over the past 3 days are excellent. Maybe if we were starting 7 years ago and had time, but maybe are just completely going to be overridden by events in the next 2 or 3 years. So how do we speed this community up? How do we get them to understand this radical change is coming, or do we just have to wait for the tidal wave to go over us?
I think that right now, as I mentioned before, as a result of a lot of things that are happening, leadership, people with funding, people with vision and programs are starting to come with us, and at our lab and several others, we're making sure that we don't try to overpromise about delivery, because they're asking us to start doing things that we would need, a team 2 or 3 sizes larger, this year. Sandia would need more people, P&L, reaching out to partners. How do we incorporate that? So I think there's a lot of demand right now for more of the things and the understanding that we do, and I think it's good. So I don't think that we want to go too fast and not deliver, because we won't get this chance again. And so I think that a lot of the people, we have lots of different companies out here who provide, whether it's industry or government or international, we're making sure that we're going to be able to really do great job and be able to get more, as opposed to disappoint everyone, and then that progress will stop.
Well, I think I tried to answer that question in my keynote on Tuesday. I think we should stop always regurgitate the same high-level concepts and which would be better, etc., and try to identify our own blind spots. And the one big blind spot that I see in our space is simply called, or can be identified as, execution. Execution is what links aspirations with results. And so in this middle part, this is where most OT security efforts fail. I think we just didn't spend too much time and effort analyzing this and figuring out ways to prevent this from happening. So this will be the crucial thing to turn this into a real market. And this is a market that we need to develop. And this market must and can only be driven by the customers, whereas in the past, we focused too much on the high-level concepts, on the product. But we didn't pay enough attention to the users. And I think as soon as that is going to change, everybody is going to be happy, society will be more resilient, we'll be filthy rich, and isn't that a great perspective?
Yeah, okay.
Fantastic.